I don't want to burst anyone's bubble here. So if you believe in haunted lost episode legends and enjoy living in that world, maybe this isn't the post for you. Don't get me wrong, I hate when people complain about lack of realism in entertainment, and I think all kids need to believe in Santa and the Tooth Fairy for as long as possible, but this is different. Back in the 80s, I met this dude, Sid, who used to cut old VHS tapes and shit. It was more than a hobby for him, it was pretty much his entire life. His parents were a bit more wealthy than I'd been blessed with, so when we were teenagers and I was slaving away at a Scats, yes, Scats, fast food restaurant, he just hung out around the house cutting tapes, all day, all night. Of course, as you get older, things in your past become a bit clearer, and I think he might have been borderline autistic, or maybe he was a very high-functioning person with Asperger's. But of course, I'm no expert, and I'm not saying that was the case. It's just the best and quickest way I can think of to explain his personality, and this obsession with cutting tapes, cutting tapes, cutting tapes. It started when he saw Old Yeller as a little kid. For whatever reason, his parents let him watch that shit. If you're unfamiliar with it, it's the tale of a boy and his dog. I hope I don't have to announce the spoiler on such an old-ass movie, but in the end the boy has to shoot his own dog because it's rabid. Sid didn't appreciate this. His dad photographed and videotaped weddings, so he showed Sid how to operate some of the machines. And Sid cut out the ending, replacing it with an earlier, happier scene, as if Old Yeller just suddenly got better off screen. He watched the tape obsessively after that, even into his early teens when I'd first met him. He made me watch it once to show how he fixed it, and I could actually picture him as a little boy once he started applauding and cheering his own faux ending. I don't want to say I was a bad influence, but after I saw it, I asked if he could do that with other movies. My major interest was perhaps taking a film or two and cutting in some nude frames the actresses hadn't really done. Don't worry though, I never had the guts to actually ask if he would. I just imagined how cool it would be. Often. Sid told me that yes, he could fix any movie he wanted. In fact, he had done it with a few others. He had a copy of a Ghostbusters cartoon and, I shit you not, every single ghost was completely removed. The story made no sense, there was no continuity, but he had accomplished it, and I was very impressed. I guess in the time of VHS, these things seemed more magical than they do nowadays. As time went by, I encouraged Sid to edit more movies, but with different purposes. Instead of whitewashing all the scary stuff like he'd wanted to do, I got him to see the light on how awesome he could make things. Somewhere out there, this chubby Star Wars nerd from our high school has all 3 original films flawlessly cut together with edited-in effects that would have made George Lucas himself cry out, "Enough meddling!" We charged him like $20 for the only copy, because we were idiots. Anyway, this went on for a while before I lost most of my interest in it. It was more of a goof for me than it was for him. This is the point where I started working, started driving, started taking bases with local girls, while he just got more and more involved in cutting those tapes. I think his favorites were cartoons. When The Simpsons came around, he went apeshit with those. Now his edits weren't so much fixing things as just breaking them in interesting ways. Another thing that sticks out in my mind is when he recorded an episode of MASH and cut it with a gory old war flick. Halfway through his version, the camp gets bombed, soldiers invade, everyone dies. At the end, he specifically worked in freeze frames of each cast member's face, eyes closed. He had completely reversed his interests and embraced what had once terrified him: scary endings. He seemed to love things like long, drawn-out sequences in terrifying silence. He'd make me be quiet while they played, too. You may have heard about this mysterious fellow named Banksy, who goes around creating interesting graffiti and whatnot. At one point, he went into a music store and replaced some Paris Hilton CDs with his own fakes. Banksy had nothing on Sid. Every other week, he'd tell me about some store or a video rental place he'd snuck some of his tapes into. He swapped out the real ones for his versions, and then he'd start all over by cutting the ones he had stolen. At one point, when I hadn't heard from him in a long while, I stopped by his parents' house and found him in the garage. He'd set up his own little movie studio there, complete with a drawing board. He was actually animating entirely new content. All at once I was both blown away by his artistic skill I'd never seen before, and very concerned about when this guy was going to come out of the dark and start acting normal like me. He barely looked up from his drawings as we spoke. I asked him what any kid, now in his late teens, would ask. "What the fuck is wrong with you?" Seriously, dude, this is some crazy shit. It's work. I'm working. My work is just as important as anyone else's. Are you even selling these anymore, or are you just sneaking them into places? How much is all of this costing your dad? I don't care. I looked at what he was so fervently illustrating. Is that a headless body? Dancing? Yeah. That's pretty dark, man. I know. That's the point. I don't get it. Those tapes. I thought they were wrong, but over time I figured out the truth. Which is, the scary stuff is right. The happy endings are the lie. He just kept drawing as I stood there. The silence was disturbing, and in that moment I could smell the BO coming off of him. It wasn't just sweat either. It was a mingling of that and a foul ass and piss-soaked cloth. I hate to say it, but I gave up on him right then. It's that moment when you look at someone you thought you knew, and all that you can think is, holy shit, I never realized they were this far gone. It wasn't until I was in my 30s that Sid crossed my mind again. I was perusing the internet, just aimlessly wandering the web, when I came across a series of urban legends about strange VHS tapes, recut movies, and lost episodes. Some of these I recognized. I'd watched them with Sid, or I'd actually seen him in the middle of working on them. Every disturbing scene, every unbelievable anecdote. I believed it, because I had been there. Others, SpongeBob cartoons, episodes of iCarly or whatever, those shows came long after I'd made my break with Sid, but the style was all too familiar. Even the ones that didn't sound like his work seemed like they could have been broken copies or attempts at mimicking his work. He was still doing it. My God, it boggled my mind. I called up Sid's old number, not entirely sure I'd still find him there. It rang for minutes on end, and I knew that the search was hopeless. Even if he still lived with his parents, it wasn't likely they'd all still be at the same house by now. Still, I made it a point to drive out to his old place, to see if he was still in that garage, cutting tapes, or manipulating them via computer, or whatever he would be up to. When I passed by the house, the unkempt lawn was overgrown with huge, waist-high weeds. The dilapidated facade of the building, with its peeling paint on the shutters, missing roof tiles, and muck-filled gutters, told me no one had lived here for a long time. I saw a note on the door, but couldn't read it from the road. Maybe it was something I could use to locate Sid and see if he'd ever gotten the help I now realized I should have given him. Pulling into the driveway, my headlights illuminated the garage door. It was windowless and vandalized with the gangster tags of some traveling band of assholes. The note on the door, as one might expect, spoke of a certain bank now owning the property. It noted that trespassing was heavily discouraged, and that at a certain point someone would be out to make sure the house was winterized. Whatever the hell that is. As I walked back to the car, defeated, something was nagging at me. I knew that Sid's parents kept a spare key under a false rock by the back stairs, basically by virtue of Sid locking us both out on several occasions. When I found that key, a sense of cold, gnawing dread swirled in my stomach. Who would move out and leave everything in place like this? The key was the most obvious thing, but flower pots and lawn decorations were still there. Sid's old, rusted-out Huffy bike was leaning against the house and had created thick, rusty streaks along the aluminum siding. I don't even know what I expected to find, but using the key, I entered the house. The smell was overwhelming. Not a putrid smell, nothing rotten or decaying, just the smell of, I don't know if this would make any sense to you, but the smell of electricity. Like burning dust on a light bulb or a heater giving off a peculiar warmed metal odor. That was the least of my concerns, however, as I saw everything just as I had left it. Everything Sid's family owned was frozen in time. The dining room table we'd all sat at on many occasions was dust-covered and supported an emaciated dead rat which had all but turned to dust. The television, that bulky, oversized television set we'd all sat around to watch Sid's tapes and laud his creativity. It sat where it always had been, silently displaying a violent bombardment of black and white static. As I moved through the rooms, the sense of panic and discomfort within me only grew. Every fiber of my being was shouting, "Run! Run, you fucking idiot!" Still, I pressed on into Sid's bedroom. It was now empty and in disrepair, his prized action figures and blank videotapes, hundreds of videotapes, stale and water-damaged. I almost wanted to call out, to shout, "Sid!" and wait for him to appear as if nothing was out of the ordinary. I went into his parents' bedroom. There, lying in bed, were two motionless bodies, gaunt, gray, half turned to dust, just like the rat in the dining room. I could scarcely believe what I was seeing with my own eyes. Not only were two dead bodies slowly dissipating within the confines of this once idyllic suburban household, but nobody had even checked on them. Nobody had discovered this until now. My mind raced. My heart raced. The only things that wouldn't move were my feet, which remained glued to the spot. Sid, I thought, must have done this. There was no way the two of them would just lie down one night and simultaneously die of natural causes. Sid had said he didn't care about his parents, and when was the last time I had seen them? God, I hadn't seen them for days, maybe weeks before the last time I talked to Sid. When I finally left the room, I took out my cell phone and began dialing 911. However, as soon as I lifted it to my head, an ear-splitting shriek of interference nearly caused me to fling the object across the room. I rushed to the kitchen phone, squealing static. I tried the living room phone just to be thorough. Static. It wasn't until I put the receiver back down that I heard it. Music. Faint, barely audible music that I hadn't noticed before. It seemed to be some repeating melody, happy and light. Some flutes, maybe a whole horn section. I followed the peppy tune to the in-house door to the garage. Pressing my ear to the door's dirty surface, I determined that the music was indeed coming from just beyond. "Sid," I called out, barely managing to form the name with cold, bloodless lips. "Sid, are you in there? Are you all right?" I tried the door only to find it somehow locked from the other side. It was no matter, since one wild kick nearly knocked the rotting wood off its hinges. "SID?" I shouted as the dust slowly cleared. Through the haze, I could only see the light of a television screen, vibrant colors, blue, green, yellow. Soon, I could make out a cartoon playing on the screen. Then, the silver wires running from the set itself to some dark mass. Then, the dark mass took shape as my eyes adjusted to the odd lighting. It was Sid, or rather, his body. Not dead nearly as long as his parents, seated in an old office chair. The wires from the television set led directly to his body, eventually disappearing into several old, crusted-over holes in his leathery flesh. Through a small, worm-eaten opening in his ribs, I thought I could see more metal inside of him. I walked to Sid's side, holding my hand over my mouth for fear of vomiting. His face was twisted into a hideous wide grin. His empty eye sockets almost seemed happy, hooded by a pleased brow line. "Hi there," I heard a jarring voice. The voice was upbeat, high-pitched. It sounded almost like Sid, but different. Bubbly, cartoony. I turned to the screen. The green grass, the blue sky, the yellow flowers, and Sid. A perfect caricature of him. It strolled along the infinite loop of that utopian cartoon background. It waved to me. "Sid," I whispered. "Oh God, Sid." He, the cartoon version of him, turned his attention away from me and continued to merrily stroll across that unending cycle of the same backdrop. He passed a shrub, then passed it again and again. The same bluebird, chirping happily, flew through the sky in a figure 8. Sid. I shook my head, unable to comprehend the scenario. I never should have let you leave reality. I thought about what Sid had done to his mom and dad. I thought about how the bank would come by soon, and this would all come to light. I watched Sid walk along for nearly a half hour. Then I unplugged the set. Nobody remembers when they appeared. Some think they have been here since the beginning of time and space, or at least since the first human existed. Others think they came into existence more recently. I personally don't care where they come from, or how they got here. I only really care about keeping myself alive. The copycats, that's what we call them. Most of the time they look almost human, trying to copy the appearances of their last victims. I say almost, because they often appear as tall as the streetlights, or have big bulging eyes and smiles with too many teeth. Some of them can speak too, sort of as a way to lure us out. In reality, most of them aren't really talking, just reusing things they hear before their victims die. Their mouths never move when they speak, and they never move an inch when they do. But those who can speak don't sound human. They speak in tongues with deep voices that sound gentle, masking their violent natures, calling out for their victims, asking them to accept their fates, to finally accept death and come to them, the Reapers. They like to live in dark spaces, areas where you can't tell if they're human or not. Basements, alleyways, anywhere with a shadow to conceal them. The feds say to keep every corner in the house, or in my case apartment, bright, and to make sure all doors or windows are locked. Because once they get in, anyone inside will never come back out. I was sure that my apartment was safe, that I could live there forever. But recently people have been running low on food. They have to risk going outside, opening the doors and letting the monsters in, forced to run through the masses of inhuman faces that flood the streets, growing as restless as we are. I see some of the braver people sometimes, out my window. I see them running through the streets, only to be devoured by the copycats, who fight over the scraps of the bodies. It's been weeks now. I'm almost out of food. I'm pretty sure the other people in my apartment building have died, either of starvation or by running into the copycats. I've noticed that the lights have been flickering in the apartments, and that the rent forms have stopped coming in. I don't know if anyone else is alive. I don't know how long I'm going to last in this hell. Some people might say I'm the lucky one, surviving this long. Personally, I think it's hell, watching as people I love die, as the world around me dies, as this new race of monsters climbs its way to the top of the food chain, wiping us out in the process. I'm keeping this journal in case I'm not the only one, in case there are others out there who somehow managed to survive against these monsters, in case someone finds me, dead or alive. Day 1. I can't do anything but keep the doors locked and keep my neighbor's shotgun at my side, though I doubt the gun will do anything against them. From what I remember from the news, the military tried to use tanks against them, barely making a dent in the copycats' numbers before being consumed by the freaks. I managed to get into a few apartments and snag some food, but I was almost caught by one of the monsters that got in during the food runs. They know I'm here now. Day 2. I saw one of my neighbors today, or I guess whatever saw them last. I remember that she was a nice old woman, with kind, caring eyes and always helped other tenants with groceries. The kind of neighbor who would show up to your door when you first move in with a plate of cookies in hand. Now she was different, forced to become one of the worst disguises that I've ever seen a copycat use. She stood at around 7 to 8 feet tall, forced to crouch down to not touch the ceiling, and her face was rounded, wider than it should have been. Her smiling mouth was filled with around 20 large teeth, stretching ear to ear, and one of her eyes was impossibly big compared to the other. I ran the other way when I saw her, or I guess it, and quickly closed the door of the random apartment behind me. I didn't have time to lock the door. I could only hold it shut and pray I was strong enough to survive when the thing kept ramming into the door. Day 3. I think it's given up now, but I can still hear it shuffling around outside. I'm going to wait another day before I go back out. Day 4. It was waiting. It wasn't moving. It wasn't breathing. It was just standing there, waiting for the door to open. How the hell does something stay alive that long? Over 24 hours without a single breath of air? I guess I should count myself lucky that I was able to shut the door. Day 5. It's angry now. I can hear it screaming. It sounds like a human voice mixed with the sound of a guitar getting kicked down the stairs, a loud wail with pauses every 1 or 2 seconds. I managed to hide in the bathroom before I heard the sound of shattering wood. It's in the apartment now. Day 6. I managed to sneak out through the window. Luckily, I was high enough to be out of reach from the flood of copycats on the street. I almost fell several times, but I made it back to my apartment without dying. Day 7. The food started to rot. I was trying to scavenge, sneaking around the hidden in the hallway, and found a couple cans of food, nothing special, just some loosely screwed shut jars of beans, tomatoes, and peaches. Fueled by hunger, I opened one and was immediately hit by the smell. It was horrible, like the smell of an egg after being microwaved until it was burnt. I don't know how long I can keep this up. Day 8. I'm all out of food, the hallways aren't safe, and it's not like I'd risk going through the window again. All I can do now is wait to die from either the copycats or starvation. Day 9. Since I'm probably gonna die here, I think it might be helpful to make a list of as many copycats as I can, how they look, how they act, stuff like that. First off are the hidden. If you remember the neighbor I ran into earlier, they're like that. Barely humanoid figures that hide in the shadows to distract from their appearance, imitating loud noises drag out those who it's hunting. They are usually extremely disfigured, most of them having a permanent smile on their face, and stand at heights from 6 ft all the way up to 10 ft tall. They can put themselves into some sort of self-induced hibernation of sorts where their bodies cease any and all activity. This can last for an undetermined amount of time. The longest I've seen this happen for was a day. I think that they do this to trick their prey out of hiding. Next are the muttering. They look almost the same as the hidden, albeit smaller, only growing to around 7 ft max. They have noticeably less disfiguration, especially around their mouth, and don't hide in the shadows as much as hiddens do. Instead, they usually stand motionless, constantly repeating the words of their victims, waiting for someone to see them. If you see something standing and talking like this, and can't tell if it's a person or not, listen to what they are saying. Most of the time, a muttering's voice will change depending on what it's saying or screaming. Common things said by mutterings are, "Help me," "Please don't hurt me," "Take me instead," or they will just stand there and scream for around 20-30 minutes. The third kind are what I like to call stalkers. They're some of the most dangerous of the copycats. They grow to around 6 ft tall and can go weeks without eating. They hide behind doors, completely still and motionless, and strike the moment the door opens. They have small round eyes on the sides of their heads, leaving room on the front of their bodies for a large mouth that stretches from the top of their head to stump at the end of their torso. They don't have legs and walk around on their hands when they need to. They don't even look human. Their skin looks like a skinned tomato, red and slimy. If you think you might be trapped by a stalker, I recommend finding anything long and sharp. It might take a few tries, but you should try to stab through the door until you hear it shriek. They normally run away after that. I'm getting tired. I might write some more in the morning. Day 10. One of them got in again. I think it crawled in from the window. I haven't seen anything like this. It's tall. It has to crawl to be able to fit in the apartment, much bigger than the one disguised as my neighbor. It's talking too, not random snippets or sentences, but full-fledged statements. Its skin is a dull gray, and its face is like a skull. It's wearing what looks to be an old black curtain around it. I heard about these in the earlier days, mostly rumors, short stories writing about them. I thought they were fake, publicity stunts by people trying to become famous. But this is real, a behemoth of a monster, staring me in the face. I can just barely make out some of its words. Why do you wait here? Why do you try and survive knowing that we are around every corner, when you know that you are the only one left, the one we have been watching for so long? What is it that fuels you? Is it hope? Fear? Or is it something else? Some primal instinct? An urge to survive when you know there is nothing you can do to stop us, all of us, from finding a way out of this hell? You were never surviving. We have been watching you all this time, studying you, copying you, learning from your actions. We have been keeping track of every move, sending one of our own to occasionally remind you of the hell you are in. You will never escape this. You will never survive this. Because eventually, when we run out of things to study about you, when we run out of things to copy, ways to scare and traumatize you, we will kill you. There is nothing stopping us from tearing this apartment to the ground, nothing stopping us from ripping through every hallway and room before finally finding and devouring you, body, mind, and soul. This is your prison, these halls are your cell, and we are your captors. Never forget that at any moment, any split second, we could destroy you the instant you stop being of interest to us. So every second, you better be moving, because the second you stop is the second that the thoughts you engrave in that little book you so desperately scribble and stop. And with those words, it left. It didn't attack, it didn't kill me, it crawled right back out of the window. I don't know how much time I have left, but I think I should focus less on writing all this down and more on finding out how to get out of here. In the fall of 1979, Marty Joseph was a 23-year-old rookie highway patrolman with the Pennsylvania State Police. Marty was fresh out of the academy, and before that had been a star football player at Temple University in Philadelphia, before returning to his native western Pennsylvania to attend the State Police Academy. He was tall, stout, and handsome by traditional standards. Dark brown hair that he kept high and tight in accordance with the state police regulations. He had dark brown eyes and a sharp jawline with high cheekbones. He was the envy of all the older officers at his station, many of whom were nearing retirement and jealous of Marty's imposing physique and boyish charms. He had only been at his station for a month and had already gotten quite the reputation for being a real ladies' man. As a patrolman with the Pennsylvania State Police, Marty was stationed out of Ebensburg, Pennsylvania, the county seat of Cambria County. Marty's patrol beat was a 50-mile stretch of U.S. Route 22 between Blairsville and Hollidaysburg, which he considered to be the loneliest road in the state. The other troopers he worked with had given him this particular stretch of highway and the surrounding small towns because they knew it was not an easy place to fill their quota of speeding tickets, especially on the night shift. Though he knew it wouldn't be easy, Marty accepted his route and got after it as best as he could. Marty didn't mind the route because he had grown up just south of US 22 in Johnstown, and contrary to what some might think of a 6'2" former college linebacker, Martin Joseph preferred to leave the excitement on the field. He liked the quiet darkness and loved the idea of being able to navigate the mountains, valleys, and hollers of Cambria County with nothing but his thoughts. During his first few weeks of training on his route, he had been under the tutelage of a few senior officers who had worked it previously. Though he was sure they were just messing with him, he found it odd that they each told him the same urban legend. "Has anyone told you about Turnpike Jack?" asked Sergeant Kelly. Thomas Kelly was a 54-year-old, soon-to-be retired Irishman who had joined the force after immigrating to the States at the age of 19. He too had once been an imposing figure in his youth, standing even taller than Marty. However, the years of police work had aged him and worn away much of what used to be muscle. "He's a real menace to us Stadies, especially out by the old Ghost Town Trail," said Kelly. Marty had heard the story of the supposed Phantom of the Freeway since he was a kid, but was surprised that these seasoned veteran state troopers would waste their time trying to scare him as an adult. He thought it a little absurd that grown men of the Pennsylvania State Police had nothing better to do than mess with the rookie. But the job could be quite boring, especially in this part of the state, and they needed to find ways to occupy themselves. "A girl from the Glow went missing a few weeks back. "Just another poor victim of Turnpike Jack," said Kelly. "Pretty little brunette, cheerleader, I think," he added. "Just another runaway, trying to get away from the tiny coal town of Nanty Glo, Pennsylvania," thought Marty. But it was his last training shift with another officer, so he bit. "You think Jack ate her whole or piece by piece?" Marty laughed, but Trooper Kelly's face was no longer lighthearted. "Now listen here, boyo. You may not believe in Turnpike Jack, but that demon son of a bitch certainly believes in you." Kelly turned his focus back on the dark stretch of highway. A very awkward silence followed for what seemed like an eternity before he spoke again. "Back when we were fully staffed, I had a partner, Robert Ramey. We got called to check out a disturbance on the Ghost Town Trail at one of the old mine sites." He paused. "I'm sure you have been briefed on what happened to old Bobby Ramey," he said, knowing the answer. Marty had been. Robert Ramey was murdered and dismembered after their cruiser was run off the road by the Ghost Town Trail, a not-so-popular hiking trail that connected several old mining sites and abandoned communities from the golden age of the coal industry. The trail weaved between the towns of Nanty Glo and Ebensburg, following along the Blacklick River. Ramey and Kelly had been reporting to a call when they were struck head-on by what Kelly had remembered as an old black truck. Kelly was thrown from the vehicle and barely survived, but when he came to after the crash, the only sign of Ramey was a bloody mess. His blood-soaked badge was left sitting at the edge of the trailhead. They found pieces of him for miles along the trail, but the culprit was never caught. "I don't know what he is, but I know that he is still out there," Kelly continued, but now barely above a whisper. "These damn woods are cursed." His first night on his own, Marty Joseph found himself repeating the words of Trooper Kelly in his head. "That demon son of a bitch certainly believes in you." It gave him a shiver down his spine, but he had grown up hearing ghost stories of Turnpike Jack and knew they were just that, ghost stories. The stories of a community that was ravished by poverty and looking for any excuse as to why so many people just up and vanished, never to be heard from again. Most of them, he thought to himself, are probably down in Pittsburgh celebrating the World Series and living it up. 2 weeks earlier, the Pirates had defeated the Orioles in 7 games to take the 1979 World Series, and it was all Marty, a Bucco fan from childhood, could think about recently. That, and Turnpike Jack, of course. Particularly Kelly's thought that he is still out there. As he drove his cruiser, a 1979 Dodge St. Regis, up and down his stretch of US 22, Marty found himself trying to find something on the radio to occupy his thoughts. For a minute he was able to catch a verse and the refrain of the Knack's My Sharona. He drummed along on the dashboard, "Ooh, my little pretty one, pretty one." But in the foothills of the Appalachians, as people called this part of Pennsylvania, he was lucky to get any radio signal at all. Even his police radio kicked out more times than not, likely because this particular stretch of highway was lined with 2,000-foot-tall signal-blocking mountains. "Foothills of the Appalachians, my ass!" Marty shouted at the static on the radio. "If these were foothills, I'd still be able to pick up WJHT Johnstown." He killed the radio and went about his route. As Officer Joseph was coming down into a large holler, he pulled off onto a small one-way road, hoping to flip around and make his way back towards the town of Nanty Glo. He was surrounded by 40-foot oaks, which in the dark October night resembled thousands of long skeletal fingers reaching up to the moon, hoping to pull it from the sky and illuminate the woods below. He decided this was the perfect time to have a smoke. Hell, nothing was going on anyway. He parked the St. Regis on the side of the road and pulled out an American Spirit from his soft pack. 3 left, he thought. That should get me through tonight. He took a long drag and breathed in a mix of sweet nicotine and crisp fall mountain air. It was sublime. After his second exquisite inhale, he realized there was a light up ahead on this little one-lane road in the middle of nowhere. It was nearly 3 a.m. on a Thursday in late October. Who the hell could be out on this stretch of road at this hour? And why would they be stopped? He decided it was his duty as a patrolman to inquire further into this mystery. Marty took another long drag from his cigarette, then crushed it out and rolled up his window. As he approached, Marty decided to kill his lights. He figured the most likely culprits were some teenagers, not much younger than himself, sneaking out and trying to hook up. The last thing he wanted to do was to cockblock some horny locals, so if that's what it seemed to be, he would try to not interrupt them. Marty pulled the St. Regis close enough to get a better look at what was going on. There were two cars parked, an older black pickup truck without a license plate, its low lights on, and just in front of the truck a bright blue VW Beetle. The truck was quite rusted out on the bottom, either that or it had a good deal of fresh mud. In the low light he could make out two figures in the back of the Beetle, and he thought to himself, "It really is the love bug tonight." Just as he was about to pull an about-face and let these two lovebirds enjoy themselves, he heard an ear-shattering scream come from the Volkswagen. Marty turned on his lights and saw what now looked like a violent struggle underway in the back seat. The larger figure seemingly engulfed the smaller one in the back seat as the low lights of the truck flickered in and out. As he instinctively began to reach for his service weapon, a Smith & Wesson .357 revolver with a 6-barrel, he saw a colossal shadow figure drag a young woman out of the back seat of the car onto the ground in front of the truck. The figure seemed to be that of an extremely tall man, but he was scarecrow-like in his build. He was clad in a long black overcoat that hugged his frame tightly, exaggerating what seemed to be all knees and elbows. Marty noticed this man's skin was so pale it almost seemed translucent. The young woman he had dragged from the car was a beautiful young blonde, no more than 21 years old if Marty had to guess. The look of complete terror on her face was all he needed to see. "Put your hands where I can see them," Marty shouted at the man in the black overcoat. "Step away from the young lady and put your hands in the air." The man stepped away from the car and revealed his full height. He must have been nearly 7 feet tall, and his arms stretched below his knees. As he obeyed Marty's command, he revealed long, bony hands complete with sharp, blade-like talons at the end of each finger. "Nice and slow, buddy. I finished at the top of my class at the Academy in Marksmanship, and I won't hesitate to put you down." Marty was channeling some confidence from his football days, using his tough guy voice, more to convince himself that he was in control of the situation than to actually command the perpetrator. It was at this point that the giant slicked his jet black hair out of his face to reveal something that made Marty's hair stand on end. His skin was white as snow, his eyes blacker than the abyss with a complete absence of light, and it appeared they were devoid of any white at all. This alone, coupled with the creature's figure, would be enough to haunt Marty's dreams for the rest of what he thought could be a very short life. But the thing that horrified him most was its teeth. This man, if you could call it that, unleashed an impossible smile, one that literally stretched from ear to ear and from nose to chin, showing what appeared to be dozens of razor-sharp teeth intricately aligned together like the keys on some sick piano. Each fang had to be the size of a kitchen knife. Marty thought he had to be imagining it. Every instinct told him he should turn tail and book it out of there, but Marty stood firm, transfixed by the grinning ghoul before him, praying that he would live to see another sunrise. He was brought back to the situation at hand by another scream from the young lady. "Fucking shoot him!" she pleaded from the ground in front of the beast. In an instant the smile was gone, and the creature moved at a speed that would rival Barry Allen, snatching up the blonde and throwing her in the back of the truck before Marty knew what was going on. "If you take another step, it will be your last," Marty exclaimed as he took aim. The next few seconds seemed to move in slow motion, as the monstrous tower of a man pounced on Marty. He was able to get off a single round from his revolver, which he thought winged the bastard, but if it did, it wasn't enough to slow him down. He slammed into Marty with the force of a semi-truck, propelling him several feet into the front windshield of the St. Regis, leaving him momentarily incapacitated and the windshield spiderwebbed, but intact. After maybe half a minute of writhing on the hood of the cruiser, he saw the old truck pulling away. Marty mustered every ounce of strength he had left and hopped in the St. Regis, flooring it to try and pursue his assailant. His head was pounding, and he was certain he had at least a half-dozen shattered ribs, but he would be damned if he let Turnpike Jack get away that easily. Marty needed all 195 horsepower of the St. Regis to catch up to the old truck, and he nearly lost control on the back holler roads more than once, but he was now only about a car's length behind. He tried multiple times to radio for backup, but between the damage the cruiser had taken and the already horrible radio signal, he was out of luck. Marty decided he was going to ram the truck and try to force him off the road. He floored it again, taking an angle to try and clip the back left of the truck's bumper, forcing him to the right and hopefully into a ditch. What Marty did not count on was the driver of the truck slamming the brakes at the exact right time to send Marty's cruiser end over end from the direct impact. Hanging upside down from his seatbelt, which he must have put on in a haze because it was only around his waist, Marty peered out into the cold, dark night. His vision was fading, but the last thing he remembered seeing before fading to black was the distinct silhouette of the slim giant with the black eyes and the razor grin, Turnpike Jack, coming his way through the darkness. When Marty awoke, he found himself having to adjust his eyes to the low light of what appeared to be a cave or cavern. He had an open gash above his right eye which had bled and crusted, impeding his vision even further. The fact that the blood had already dried meant he had probably been there for a while. As Marty tried to wipe the blood from his eye, he quickly realized his hands had been bound behind his back. He searched his surroundings for any indication of where he might be, finding a small amount of light resonating from a lantern set up against the cave wall opposite him. As his eyes adjusted, he scanned the area in the light only to behold a sight that turned his stomachs and forced a muffled retch. On the far wall, a few feet from the lantern, was the young blonde. She was dead, ripped open from sternum to navel. Her torso had been emptied of its contents, leaving just a bloody shell. She had literally been gutted. Marty turned and hacked up everything that was left in his stomach and gasped for breath. It was then that he heard a sinister cackle coming from the deepest, darkest part of the cave. Out of the darkness rose the form of Turnpike Jack, flashing that same visceral smile, except now his teeth were no longer white, but stained and dripping with red. He stood to his full height and stepped into the light of the lantern. "Hungry?" he asked with a laugh as he gestured toward the body of the young blonde. "There's plenty to go around," he said facetiously, his voice low and raspy. "So it speaks," Marty said to the creature. "Does it have a name, or should I just call you Jack?" The creature was amused by this line of questioning, mulling over the words it would choose to share with its soon-to-be prey. "I have had many names over the centuries." He paused, seemingly reminiscing. "In the old country they called me Baba Yaga. In London I was the Ripper. Down south I have been called El Coco, but in this place I am most frequently Turnpike Jack." As he spoke, Marty was working on an escape plan. Luckily, this monster hadn't searched all of his pockets before binding his arms, and he was able to secure his Zippo lighter from his back pocket. He knew he needed to keep Jack talking long enough for him to burn through the cloth restraints on his hands. Even if he could manage to free himself, he was pretty banged up, but at least he would have a chance. "Looks like I got you pretty good, huh?" Marty said as he gestured to a hole in the overcoat, darkened with blood. "Ah, yes. A few inches to the right and I may have been in some serious trouble. A good thing I had a meal ready to rejuvenate me," he said as he clutched the hair of the blonde, dragging her corpse closer to him. As the creature did this, a very important thought popped into Marty's head, an old adage he heard as a kid that, if it bleeds, you can kill it. Marty had managed to light the Zippo and was making quick progress on his restraints. He was almost free, and his thoughts shifted to how he was going to bury this monstrosity. What could he use to his advantage against a creature that has survived for centuries eating the flesh of human beings? As he was searching for answers, it dawned on him that he had been in this place before. It wasn't a cave, it was a mine. He was in the belly of the old Lackawanna Iron and Coal Company mine, just south of the now ghost town of Wayroom. Marty lamented the fact that in high school he used to come down here to get high with his buddies, but his youthful transgression may actually give him a chance to survive his run-in with the devil himself. It was almost by divine providence that Marty noticed an old MJ carved into the cave wall, barely visible in the lantern light. He had put it there when he was 16 and had brought his then-girlfriend, Lucy Gallus, down here to do the deed for the first time. Marty can barely remember losing his virginity that night, but he could never forget the beating he took from her father for taking her into one of the most unstable mine shafts in the eastern United States. They had shut down several shafts because cave-ins and rock slides had killed dozens of miners over the years. Marty knew that where he sat was liable to collapse at any moment, and that with the right kind of force he could bring down the roof. Marty had been pretty unlucky thus far on his first shift, but there was some kind of otherworldly force working in his favor, as just below his carved MJ, barely within the light of the lantern, was his service revolver. He would not have much of a chance and needed enough time to make his move. He tried to stall what he imagined was Jack's plan to dismember and eat him, possibly alive. "So, Jack, what are you going to do to me?" Turnpike Jack's black eyes widened, and he flashed that sinister smile again. "Well, officer, I plan to do to you what I did to this lovely young lady." He gestured to the blonde. "Except you, Officer Joseph. I will consume whole." His smile grew and his dark eyebrows furrowed. Marty, continuing to stall for enough time to free himself, taunted his captor. "Not sure that's possible, even with your big mouth," he said, almost daring the creature to prove it could. It was then that the demon showed itself in its truest form. Jack's already impossible smile began to grow as he opened his mouth, detaching his jaw and stretching it nearly to the ground. His black eyes rolled over pure white, much like a shark's eyes when it bites into its prey, as he shuffled what was left of the blonde into his now doorway-sized mouth. At this juncture he resembled a giant anglerfish in more ways than one. His skin, his eyes, his teeth, crunch, crunch, crunch. 3 bites with his megamouth and she was gone, but this was exactly the distraction Marty needed to free himself. He made a beeline for the Smith & Wesson and secured it just as the beast was slurping up the blonde's legs like oversized linguine. He raised the gun at the demon and slowly backed out towards the entrance to the mine shaft, one step at a time, keeping his hand cannon fixed square on Turnpike Jack. Jack laughed. "Now that I've fed that little toy, won't do much damage." "I kind of figured that," Marty retorted, "but I'm going a few tons of coal and limestone might do the trick." Turnpike Jack grasped what Marty was planning to do and leered at him with a mix of anger and fear in his eyes. He began his charge, but his movements weren't as explosive as they had been earlier. He appeared to be a bit more sluggish this time around. Marty had theorized that much like the giant snake that he was, when Turnpike Jack consumed his entire blonde victim in 3 bites, he would need to digest her before he could attack with the speed and ferocity he had back on the road. It was a huge gamble to apply some basic biological principles to a creature of nightmares, but in this instance it paid off. Marty had just enough time to expel 4 rounds from the revolver into the ceiling above before Jack could reach him. The shots did their job, bringing the entire shaft down on Jack with a colossal amount of force. Marty was thrown back almost 20 feet from the impact, adding a broken leg to his running list of injuries suffered at the hands of the monster known as Turnpike Jack. He coughed and tried to see through the cloud of debris. The collapse had left him barely able to move, barely able to breathe, and losing a dangerous amount of blood. In his immobilized state, all he could do was crawl, so that is what he did. From his youthful exploits in the mine, he knew it was nearly a quarter mile to the mine entrance, likely another half-mile to the ghost town of Verum, and yet another quarter-mile back to Route 22. "Can I make it a mile in this state?" Tim thought to himself. He wasn't sure if he would survive, but the knowledge that Turnpike Jack was somewhere behind him, buried in literal tons of rock, gave him the motivation to keep moving up the shaft. As he crawled, he was drifting in and out of consciousness. In his delirious state, Marty had a revelation about the world we live in. If there can be a Turnpike Jack, what other kind of evil can there be in this world? The thought had his head spinning, not just from his probable concussion and loss of blood, but from this new sense of fear, living in a world where the manifestations of our deepest, darkest nightmares could actually exist. As he crawled and climbed further up, Marty tried his best to ignore this thought. He actually preferred to focus on the immense amount of pain that he was experiencing rather than think about the existence of true evil in this world. As he neared the end of the shaft, another thought occurred to Marty. If there was great evil in this world, then there also must be great forces at work for good. He had needed several things to go his way in order to survive his ordeal with Turnpike Jack, many things that were extremely improbable, but somehow, some way, they had turned out in his favor. He thought back to the luck he had with his lighter, the mine shaft, his gun. All of these things seemed to be just coincidences, but the more he thought about them, the more he thought they were evidence of greater forces at work. After nearly an hour of excruciating pain, he reached the entrance of the mine, only to be greeted by the morning sunrise, and something else, something he couldn't believe. It was a tall figure coming towards him, silhouetted by the sun and distorted by the fog of the early morning. It couldn't be Jack, Marty thought to himself. I buried him back there. As the figure approached, Marty tried to prepare himself for battle yet again. He had 2 rounds left in his revolver, and he raised it in front of him, struggling to make out the dark figure as it drew nearer. Is that you, boyo? Marty recognized the familiar Irish accent. Sergeant Kelly? Marty was overjoyed to see the face of his superior cutting through the haze of the early morning. He could tell by the look on the sergeant's face that he must be in pretty bad shape. How? He stuttered. How did you find me? Someone reported a police cruiser engulfed in flames on a back road not far from here. When we realized you were nowhere to be found, we scrambled the troops to come and find you. Don't ask me how, but something told me that I would find you in Warum. Kelly helped Marty to his feet and threw his arm over his shoulder to help him limp back to the road. What the hell happened to you, boyo? Sergeant Kelly asked as they made their way slowly back to the safety of his St. Regis. You are going to think I'm out of my mind, said Marty. You may be surprised, replied Kelly. Marty went on to explain his entire ordeal, and Kelly believed every word. Over the next few days, the state police investigated the matter, digging up the old Lackawanna iron and coal mine, looking for evidence of Marty's story, but the only remains were a few bone fragments the coroner speculated belonged to a young female. They never found the blue Volkswagen or the old black truck, nor did they find the remains of a monster straight out of a horror movie. Though he had seen the cave-in bury Turnpike Jack, Marty couldn't help but go back to what Sergeant Kelly had told him. I don't know what he is, but I know that he is still out there.